Is assessing demographics an integral part of the way you build your property portfolio or you plan your business or professional ventures? If not, you could be missing the key to building longer-term wealth in a way that minimises your risks. Now, I'm sure you know that we regularly talk about demographics on this podcast, and I write about it in my blogs because I believe it's more important than most of the other things in determining what's going to happen in the future. But in today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, I have my regular monthly chat with leading Australian demographer Simon Kuestenmacher, and we're going to talk about the big picture demographic trends and factors. In fact, we're going to share with you 15 things about Australia and its demographics that you may not understand. So at the end of this, you're going to have a better big picture macro view. We're not going to dig into the micro level of demographics of locations or owner-occupier percentages or wages growth or things that are really, really important when you're selecting locations. We're staying in the big picture and we're going to teach you a lot about Australia. So welcome to today's episode of the Michael Yardney podcast.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's most trusted property commentator who has once again been voted Australia's leading property investment advisor. That's the 5th time he's won a similar award in the last 7 years.
Well, as I said in the introduction, today's podcast is about Australia, getting to let you know a bit about some of the interesting facts about property and demographics in Australia. And my regular guest today is Simon Kuestenmacher, one of the co-founders of the Demographics Group. He's a columnist for The Australian, a rising star globally in the field of data management and insights. And Simon, thank you for joining us once again.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, I love talking about demographics with you. We'll speak a bit about that. But since a lot of people who've come to the podcast are interested in property, maybe I can start with a couple of property facts. And interestingly, according to CoreLogic, 52.4%, over half of Australia's household wealth is in housing. The rest, a large part of it also is then in superannuation. So the Australian property market the residential property market underpins Australia's wealth. According to CoreLogic, there's about 10.4 million residential dwellings in Australia. In fact, I just saw the latest ABS statistics say there's even a few more than that, valued at around $7.3 trillion. Simon, I'm not sure how many zeros there are, but that vastly outshines the stock market and the superannuation funds and commercial real estate, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it speaks to the general importance of housing for the wealth and prosperity of Australians, which of course means that if more and more Australians are choosing to rent, are being forced to rent, that then we get a wealth management issue there, because those people need to be particularly careful in creating some sort of wealth. Wealth doesn't need to be stored in housing, but we are operating in a country where it traditionally has been set up this way, where the house is the safest and most commonly known way of wealth creation over time. So if you are too far advanced in your career, in your age, and you are renting, you hopefully have all the other appropriate wealth management issues in place, because that's the main wealth creation game in Australia. So we must not underestimate just how important this is. And imagine if you are retiring without a property to your name. That actually means that you still fork out quite a bit of your limited pension or retirement funds for housing, which a owner-occupier doesn't anymore.
And you're not even talking about an investment. We really just should end up in retirement with your home with no debt. There's no doubt that you're going to have superannuation as well, but you're very right. So that is going to create a generation of people who are going to have more challenges as they get into their golden years because they don't have that security of a house there. Now, one of the issues with Australian housing is people are saying people are taking on too much debt. We've got this debt bomb that's going to explode. But when you take into account the total value of Australian real estate, over $7.3 trillion, and all the mortgage debt against that 1.83 trillion, that gives an overall loan to value ratio in Australian residential real estate of about 25%. That's not overcommitted. Now, sure, there's some people who've overcommitted. They've bought, young families have to take on big loans when they start off. Some investors who've borrowed too much to buy in the wrong area. But a lot of people who bought their house years ago, in fact, half of homeowners don't have any mortgage debt against them at all. So that's the point I think you were making. That's where you want to end up, don't you, Simon?
Absolutely. I think that's the ultimate goal that you have. And you're absolutely right in saying that the market itself isn't in deep trouble. That's good news. There are, of course, people that are overextended. And that's the big danger, is the way that our workforce developed. Because the workforce over recent years really split into lots of high paying jobs and lots of poor paying jobs, with a shrinking share of middle skilled, middle paid jobs. So the Australian middle class has actually been hollowed out. That means that the middle skilled jobs have actually stayed stagnant in their number, and we just added highly paid and low paid jobs. So that means that the low paid workers, they are really the ones that we are concerned about, whether we could get them in some way or form onto the path to home ownership. And that's the big challenge, because housing in the capital cities is expensive. It is affordable enough still if you are on a reasonably high income. Otherwise, it's not. And then we need to just look at the low skilled, low income workers, particularly the ones in the capital cities, for whom housing is just out of reach. And we then need to look into the future 30, 40 years for those people. And we see, okay, there is a big cohort that is marching into a future without substantial savings. So that's the corner of the market that we are concerned about, because we probably have to assume that they are low incomes, that they pay 9.5% of their income into superannuation. That doesn't really create enough income to live comfortably in retirement, even if they paid superannuation throughout their whole career. So we are kind of building ourselves, we are creating a future problem there at the moment. And ideally, if we come up with innovative ways of getting people onto the path of home ownership, we hopefully can minimize the number of people that are in this situation. I do think right now, funnily enough, because of the corona crisis, we might move into the right direction. Because the easiest way to build ourselves, or to amp up the employment base in Australia, is a supersized infrastructure program. And that's where it has been announced last week this week actually, that this will be happening. And that means the infrastructure programs, they actually create middle skilled jobs. So this way we actually have a fair chance of getting people from low skilled jobs upskilled into middle skilled jobs. And then that enables them to a path of home ownership, which is really good news in my opinion.
Oh, that's important. But interestingly, coming from a generation or two older than you, it's always been hard to get into the property market. It's always been hard to buy your first home. I think it's very hard today to get that initial deposit gap to save, because for a long time, houses were going up in value faster than you could save a deposit. But people say, well, why not move elsewhere? But the jobs aren't elsewhere. You can find cheap accommodation, but not where people have got a job. So that is an issue, and probably a good discussion for a different podcast. But if we look at Australia, and let's have a look at some of the demographic things I'd like to discuss with you. I guess part of the reason our property values have increased is our population is increasing, and they're all wanting to live in much the same place. So Australia's population has doubled in the last 48 years. The current population is 25.5 million. It was 1970, it was 12.5 million. And it's likely to keep growing. Now, we spoke recently about the fact that it may not grow as fast as we hoped. You said there's a missing million, but there's still a lot of growth to come in Australia, Simon.
Exactly. And so COVID will slow growth a bit, but we are still on the path of a growing population in Australia, because our international standing hasn't changed. So that's That's good news. And that means that the property market will actually recover. So in a sense, we can be reasonably sure that the bit of a slump that we're in right now, and probably will be in for another 2 years or whatever the exact number of months will be, but then it will recover. So for those people that have a bit of cash ready at hand at the moment, this might be a good couple of years or two to buy up another investment property if they chose to do so. But it's really overall a matter of trust into the Australian property market. And I'd say it is you're right in trusting the market because Australia's standing is just too good.
Well, the government has a vested interest in it because it knows that one of the things holding together the 25.5 million Australians is their love of living in a home. They want their assets to be secure. They want that 70% of Australians who own a home to feel secure that the value of their property isn't going to go down. The banking industry has a vested interest as well. Now, I know some people would say, well, that's a Ponzi scheme and it's a house of cards about to fall down. But again, as we said, the home is people's castle. They're not going to give it up. They're not going to sell it. They've got to live somewhere. They've got to move somewhere. And a lot of people aren't overcommitted financially. So if we look at that population, though, they're not all living in all around Australia. We're a very populous nation, but we're also very concentrated, very different to overseas, isn't it, Simon?
We are actually the most closely or most intensely centralized, concentrated population on the planet. There's no other country, if we disregard city-states like Singapore, there's no other country on the planet where that higher share of the population lives in just 5 cities. We have 2/3 of our population living in just 5 cities. That is very intense clustering. And that is largely driven by the jobs that we create. We create only, or not only, mostly knowledge work jobs, those highly skilled jobs that like to cluster in the city center. It's all those IT jobs, all of those accountancy and consulting jobs, they benefit from being located close to another similar job because there's so much business to business activity happening. So that means that if we create the jobs, the people will want to live in reasonable distance to their jobs. And so we've seen over the last 5 years that the population growth, 80% of population growth was just in the top 5 cities. So that means we are intensifying the concentration of population rather than decentralizing it. For the last 5-6 decades, it has been the explicit goal of all levels of government, really, to decentralize Australian population, and it hasn't worked. And we can always argue that there might be now another opportunity to do so with working from home becoming more popular and more accepted. That this, if we also say this infrastructure program that will be amping up the employment base of Australia, if they concentrate on linking the regional centers to the capital cities, that then the regional centers like your Ballarets, your Bendigos, your Toowoomba's, that they will actually become more attractive locations for residents, that might help to ease decentralization a bit. But we've said this before for many decades, and my bet wouldn't necessarily be on this to be all that successful. There'll be a couple of players, regional cities that successfully manage this transition. But I think overall, the increasing centralization of Australia, or at least the status quo of centralization staying the same, is probably the way ahead for the next 10, 20 years.
Yes, that seed change and tree change didn't really occur because as we get older, we still want to be close to our family. We still want to be close to the dentist and the doctors we had before. So many people aren't moving that far away. As we're looking deeper into the Australian population, a large percentage of us are born overseas. It's a very multicultural society, isn't it, Simon?
Oh, and we've done it better than anyone. We have our largest city in Sydney, 40% of the population was born overseas. This is a really high percentage. And just imagine how well we are doing in terms of integrating people into Australian society. Of course, every now and then there are conflicts, but we run our largest cities at well over 30% of the population being born overseas. We're doing great. Berlin, which is considered to be the multicultural capital of Germany, has 16, 17% of the population born overseas. Not anywhere near. Like a regional town like Horsham is just as multicultural by that measurement as Berlin is.
Isn't that interesting? So in the past, most of them came from England, but nowadays many are coming from Asia, aren't they, from China and India?
Exactly. We've seen this big shift from migration from Western countries towards Eastern countries. And in the 1960s, Jeffrey Blaney spoke about or wrote about the tyranny of distance, that Australia is too far away from all the good things. This time around, we're actually pretty close to the main action in the world. We've seen the big urbanization of the cities in India and in China. And the people moving to those cities, they are not slum dwellers. This is the largest emergence of a middle class in the history of humanity. So this is really a big deal. And these people, they want education more than anything. And so, which is why we have this big international student boom. Well, last year we had over 600,000 international students enrolled in Australia. That is huge. And they bring a lot of money. And we do know, we tend to say that international students are the canary in the coal mine. They kind of sent us the first signal of what the future will look like of migration, because 1 in 6 international students, rule of thumb, will become a permanent resident. That's the way that we're shifting. And a good consumer product, actually, they adjust to this. And housing is almost also a consumable, but it's moving less fast as the cereal or vegetable aisle in your local supermarket. But the housing preferences will, of course, change. And the large importance of migration in Australia also gives us an idea of where housing growth is needed. Because if I am a migrant coming to Australia, I don't know Melbourne, I don't know Sydney, I don't know how those cities work. The only thing that I have about the city is an address, a single address, either my university or maybe my office, my place of work. And so I'm moving for my initial housing option. I'm moving as close as I can afford to this place that I know of. That means we have this emergence of what we call launchpad suburbs. All of the migrants move into the limited number of suburbs where the jobs and the unis are clustered first. And then after a couple of months, a couple of years, maybe even, they fully understand of how the city works, how the local housing market works, because they speak to their co-workers, to their friends. They look on all the big real estate websites. They listen to your podcast. And then eventually they move to other suburbs, and there is no clustering anymore of migrants. The established migrants, they don't cluster in any significant way. They actually evenly distribute across the canvas of the cities. But the initial migrants, they heavily cluster simply because that's what you do when you don't know a city. It's also the same, by the way, with interstate migrants. If a young Melbourneite moves to Sydney or Brisbane for work, they move into launchpad suburbs first and then move into other suburbs later.
Well, that's nothing new, because that happened in the 50s and 60s when the Italians and the Greeks came, in the 70s when the Vietnamese came. And then the next generation moved out to the outer suburbs as well. But the sort of suburbs, the launchpad suburbs, are very different today. One of the things I find interesting to try and understand is the spread of ages of Australia, because while we're having more young people coming in, and not just for migration, but we're making more babies as well, on the whole, our population is aging because we're living longer. So there's more people aged over 65 than under 18 looming in the future.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So the ratio of retirees to non-retirees is shifting towards more retirees. That's fine.
As long as we can afford to pay their pensions. We said a moment ago, some of them are going to have trouble surviving. They're going to need more healthcare, aren't they, Simon? And they're going to be dependent on the government. So we need more of the young people there to pay wages, to pay taxes.
Absolutely. And the scheme at the moment really relies on taking in more young people to actually pay for the old ones. And a skilled migration scheme is the easiest way of doing this, because you need to remember that as a human, you cost the state money before you pay taxes. So it means up to 22, 25. And then you cost the state money once you retire. So 65 plus. So that really means there's 40 years of your life where you bring money to the state. And with migrants, we just cut out the first 25 expensive years. International students even pay an arm and a leg for their education. So they are the real cash cows of the Australian economy, if you will. And that actually makes the scheme still work, the whole retirement scheme. In theory, at least, we will not rely on migration that much anymore once we reach the 2030s, maybe, because if it works, in theory at least, the superannuation scheme you're meant to fully finance your own retirement. And by the mid 2030s, we'll have the first cohort of people that paid superannuation throughout their whole career. And so we then see how well that works for those people. Because we'll have lots of rich folks, they'll easily manage this. Lots of middle class folks, they'll also manage. But then it's the real issue is the increasing low income class. Will the superannuation scheme as we have it right now work out for them? My suspicion is that it won't. So then we need to come up with a way of financing the retirement of low skilled workers. And it's in a sense, we're just procrastinating on helping out low income workers by not paying them decent wages at the moment, because we do need to pay for them in retirement. So something here isn't working just yet.
Simon, despite the aging population, we're more generationally diverse than ever before, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And that is simply because if people live longer, you have more generations at the same time hanging out in the same country. Because more and more people work longer, some for reasons of passion, some for reasons of economic necessity. More and more workplaces actually cover a larger range of generations. So that means the successful worker today needs to not only be culturally on point with their messages, but you also need to manage people that are way younger than you. You need to manage people that are way older than you. So you really, and we are of course more gender diverse as well in our workforce. So all of a sudden, those people that can manage complexity, that can manage diversity of all sorts, and better, that can integrate different opinions, different worldviews into their messaging, they are the real winners of the 2020s, really.
Right. Now, we're also living in some of the most livable cities in the world. So we're growing faster than most parts of the world, but we're also, every year, the Economist Intelligence Unit, and I'm not sure if that's an oxymoron or not, but let's leave it accept that they are intelligent. They have this global livability index, and Melbourne usually wins. It actually came second place now, I think, the last couple of years. Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide came in the top 10. Perth tied with Geneva at 14, Brisbane at 18. So all our capital cities were in the top 20 of most livable cities. We're very lucky. This takes into account stability, healthcare, culture, education, but there's nowhere else like Australia.
No, and it's a really big draw card in a global economy that increasingly shifts towards knowledge work. There are more and more jobs that are created that could, in theory at least, be located anywhere. And that means that all the countries are really in the hunt for global talent. And what we have to offer international young talent is, well, you can do your job either from here, you can do it from Geneva, you can do it from London, from San Francisco. Who cares really? But we offer you a really livable city. Ideally, our cities are also affordable. That's one issue that some people said we might need to fix. And then we will get the best of the best talent. And that also means that then more and more companies will find us attractive, because companies will locate themselves at places where talent will want to be, because the big companies rely on talent more than on cheap energy or anything before that, anything than ever before. So that also means that our draw card of being a stable democracy is incredibly important. And young people, if you are a 20-year-old person right now that is considering where they will want to go to university, where they will want to invest their youth, their energy, their career into. Well, I'm looking at the news out of the UK, I'm looking at the news out of the US. All of a sudden, Australia looks twice as attractive as any of those places, which is very good for us.
It is. Now, sure, this world has got an unusual set of challenges at the moment, but when companies are looking where they're going to set themselves up as well around Southeast Asia, which, as we've already said, is going to be the growth area of the world, Hong Kong may well have been a choice a couple of years ago, but nowadays I can see that Australia could well be the country of choice, and that'll probably really mean Melbourne and Sydney, and maybe to a lesser extent Brisbane, as locations to set up some Asia Pacific centres for some of the big global companies.
Oh, absolutely. If I'm a big global player and I want to build my Asia Pacific office, I either go to Australia or Singapore at the moment. These are my safe bets. So it's essentially Hong Kong got, as you mentioned, got knocked out of the list for now. I'd be pretty much, why bother? It's not worth the risk at the moment. And we do know that in the time of recovery from COVID-19, you are looking for stability. You want to be as sure as you possibly can about your investments. And Australia offers just that. In a sense, global investments are scanning the globe for stable growth. In a sense, they want a bit of vanilla, a bit of beige investments. And we have a treat for all of those people looking for beige vanilla investments at the moment.
A sound banking system, a fairly stable government system, well, compared to other places in the world, transparency. So, yes, there's lots of advantages. Now, as we look at how all these new people are living over the decades, I've noticed the change, the trend of apartment living. When I grew up, they built flats, as we used to call them in the suburbs, for the poorer people who couldn't afford to live in a house. But now it's the lifestyle of choice, particularly in Sydney. I think Sydney took up apartment living a decade or so before Melbourne, and Brisbane's still a little bit behind both those cities, Simon.
Yes, and this has again to do with the concentration of jobs and also with the acceptance of an hyper urban lifestyle. We've seen also many US TV shows, Sex and the City, Friends, Frasier.
I watched all of those.
Exactly. Where apartment living was really was portrayed in a very attractive way, where very attractive, desirable people lived in apartments. And that really showed the way of, no, you actually can live or can make a really nice apartmentia into the inner suburbs. And that's what we've seen there. And it's also, of course, a simple price point issue where it's just cheaper to house people in a large tower than to go further and further out.
Sure. Well, it'll be interesting to see how people are going to want to live and what sort of accommodations, even if it's going to be apartments, maybe they're going to be bigger apartments with extra rooms. Europe's done it very well. People live in apartments, but they're different style apartments, aren't they? They're more homely.
And I guess that's the biggest issue that we had. And so we have the general preferences of housing and the life stage of the population intermingling here. Over the last decade, millennials did not have kids just yet. Millennials, of course, this big pile, this big chunk of people that were moving out of their parents' homes, that were moving into Australia from overseas, and they needed 1 or 2 bedroom apartments for the 2010s. Not so anymore in the 2030s, where millennials at scale are moving into family formation. That means this biggest chunk of people all of a sudden needs 4 bedrooms. Probably rather larger than smaller houses or apartments, simply because we're now working from home more frequently. Probably 1 or 2 partners will work from home occasionally. So you really need a spare bedroom. Now these people will also have kids. That means that the housing demand will shift from 1 and 2 bedrooms rather rapidly to 3 and 4 bedrooms. that also means that millennials will move out of the inner city 1 and 2 bedrooms to wherever the 3 and 4 bedrooms are available. If they were available in a city, they would stay there, but they're not. So they move out. What happens in the inner city? Well, the next generation, Gen Z, will move into university, will move into early career stage, and will move into apartments. The problem here is that Gen Z is significantly smaller. The problem is also that it will stay even smaller because we'll have less migration, which by now would be Gen Z of age. So we have this time of probably 3-4 years where we don't have enough people moving into the inner city apartments that are being vacated by Gen Y, who are on the lookout for 3 and 4 bedrooms. So it's not a great time at the moment to be invested into 1 and 2 bedroom apartments in the inner city, because there's less people crowding into the inner city, at least for a couple of years.
Well, I think they have had other difficulties as well. More recently, they've all been tarred with the same brush, but there have been some issues with the structural problems moving forward. I can see that they're not going to be good investments. We talked about Europe a moment ago, the different style of apartment in Europe. The other interesting thing I found in Europe is the buildings, the dwellings, they last for longer. They last for decades, for centuries. You would have noticed here coming from Europe that we don't keep our properties very long, 50 years, and you pull it down 25 years sometimes if the land's worth more. Very different, isn't it?
And it's a problem in terms of wealth creation. If you think about the standard London, standard Stockholm, standard Berlin 4-5 story apartment block, some of them have been standing in almost the same form for 300-400 years. They are, of course, constantly being renovated, but so that means you create wealth. We talk about brick gold or concrete gold in Germany is a standard phrase for you build this chunk of wealth that can move on to the next generation. And in Australia, we have to tear our buildings down after 30, 40, 50 years and then build anew. We are wasting time. And it's particularly a shame since we had this long run of almost 30 years without a recession, where we should have built higher quality properties that last for longer to create intergenerational wealth. You can see that a country like Argentina is one of my favorite examples here. Argentina was filthy rich 100 years ago because of the big meat boom over there. And then they had decades of poor economic luck, if you will. But still, Buenos Aires has the big, important, beautiful buildings standing there where now fairly normal folk live in those apartments. And you're still benefiting from your success from 100 years ago today in times of economic downturns. So we missed out on that opportunity. We really need to think about the buildings that we're building. Are we building them of high enough quality with a good enough mix of materials that they can actually last over many generations? Right now, I'm not even willing to talk about centuries here.
But I think the sort of accommodation we are wanting to live in has changed. So the sort of house that my parents grew up in, where the toilet was out the back and then the garage was way down the back and they used to have an incinerator in the backyard, people don't want that. The land has become too valuable. So you were saying a moment ago that the millennials are moving out of the inner city areas. I see more people being prepared to live in townhouses. The last census showed that also, that there were people living in big modern accommodation but on more compact blocks because of the position, the location of them.
I think so. If you talk about where people will want to live, everybody will want to live in a $500,000 8-bedroom villa with a pool in the inner city with a big garden. But those buildings don't exist. So you need to make compromises. And one thing that people are not willing to compromise on is the number of bedrooms. And so really, if we were to offer the big cohort of millennials that are now moving into family formation, 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings, not necessarily houses in the inner city, they will consider them. So there's no reason why you can't create a beautiful, very livable, large 4-bedroom apartment that a family would want to live in an inner suburb or middle suburb. And at the moment, we're not building those because it seems more lucrative to build just 2-bedroom units into this block that I'm developing. Not so much, I would say, in the 2020s, where 1 or 2 bedrooms will be not in demand anymore. So my prediction would be that we are seeing more developments, apartment developments with 3 and 4 bedrooms.
I think that's part of what's going to be necessary. In the middle suburbs, people don't particularly want to live in the CBD. They don't really want to live in the outer suburbs. But it's the old issues of town planning and the NIMBYs not in my backyard and the notes not over there either. It's actually hard to get them through. So there's 2 elements to it. Town planning is one of the issues, and the other is the commercial viability of doing those sort of developments. But I can see that people aren't going to be wanting the small apartments, the 1-bedroom, and even some of the smaller 2-bedroom apartments, Simon.
And I'm really worried about some of the developments or some of the towers that are in the inner city that are fully relying on 1 and 2-bedroom apartments. I think some of them might need to be remodeled. So you actually create larger dwellings in there, because otherwise you don't want an inner city with high vacancy rates. It doesn't work for many years. So hopefully our building stock is flexible enough and can be changed around, because otherwise we'll see a diminishing value of the inner city. If rents go down too much, you'll have poorer people move in. And we had the same trend in the American inner cities in the 70s and 80s, where the inner cities in the US were really undesirable places. And you don't want to move into that development. You want to keep the inner city as a really attractive, desirable location, at least for some people. Some people will always want to live in the outer suburbs, in the regions, but you want to keep the inner city really attractive. And we might struggle with this if we don't create enough desirable housing there.
Well, a number of years ago, I wrote that I saw some of those high-rise towers being the slums of the future, and I agree with you. I think one of the challenges is they're not all owned by one person, so it's actually going to be hard to get people together to combine apartments. But I think one of the great things about our cities over the last couple of decades is the vibrancy of being in the inner city. In the old days, when I used to, as a kid, go to town, it was dead on the weekends. No one was there. One of the nice things is that people are living there. They're vibrant, and we don't want them to become slums, do we?
And it's a mixture of really good mixed development in a sense, in a small area space. If you think about the Docklands in Melbourne, that when they were first developed, we only had offices there, and it was dead after 5 p.m. Now that the apartments that were built a bit later than the offices are actually occupied, there is enough activity there so that it isn't a ghost town. So those mixed use developments or mixed use of a suburb takes a bit of time, and it takes careful management from a city, from a local government to actually occur. But it is working. And so you don't want this. You don't want too many neighborhoods that are dead at either the daytime or the nighttime. You want to have a rather vibrant economy. And if you are really smart about your building use or your space use, let's say a restaurant or bar that is only open at nighttime, can it have a different use during the day? What's with the school gymnasium? Can this be used by the community after hours? All of these really small scale uses of buildings can really activate the livability of a suburb.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about Australia, the lovely country. A lot of the people listening to this podcast are living in, what our future could be like, what our housing markets and our demographics are going to be like. Another interesting trend with demographics is the makeup of our workforce. Baby boomers look like they're going to stay in the workforce a little longer than some of them had intended to, but the mixture of the demographics in the workforce is changing, Simon.
It is. And we do know that now, as you mentioned, many baby boomers will not retire at 65. Some of them, because of Corona, their stock portfolio, the superannuation portfolio, has taken a significant hit. So there's just not enough of a nest egg there. So you just hang out at your office for another year or two until the market recovered and you earned a bit more. but then they will eventually retire. And there are, of course, more and more people who have knowledge jobs where you don't necessarily retire. You get the gold watch on Friday, and as of Monday, you are a retiree. But there'll be more and more people that slowly slide into retirement, that then go back to or down to 3 or 4 days per week, then just do the occasional bit of consulting 1 or 2 days a week, and then essentially at some point eventually they will retire. So we'll have more older workers hanging out in the offices, in the workforce. But overall, the big shift in the 2020s will be that millennials all move out of education, out of university, into the workforce. So at the very, very peak, we have close to half of the workforce being Gen Y. What that means in the 2020s is that if you don't understand Gen Ys, it'll be very, very difficult to operate a business successfully. And it means you need to take the worries, the troubles, the concerns of Gen Y seriously. This is, of course, a somewhat moralizing generation that is really concerned about the environment, that is really purpose obsessed, a generation that wants their job not just to provide them with an income, but that wants to provide them their job with a meaning of life. It's a bit much to ask for many a job out there, but that's the main desire of Gen Y. And I would say that the successful companies of the 2020s will really understand this and will at the very least offer Gen Ys meaningful and substantial corporate social responsibility schemes that they can be proud of their company, that they can invest a bit of their time each year towards these more noble goals of a company. And of course, this will mean that more and more Gen Ys will be brave enough to become entrepreneurs, to start their own business and create whatever that means to have a purposeful job. But they will try to create this. And that's a rather wonderful thing that will come out of Gen Y. But on the flip side of this is that many, many of your Gen Y workers will sit in this job that doesn't provide them enough meaning of life. They will feel sad about their job. They'll be a bit angsty and unhappy with the job. I call this work image issues. And that's the office equivalent to body image issues, where you look at these sexy models on Instagram and on billboards, and then you think, you look at your own body, you think, well, it could be better. And people think about their jobs in the same way. So you need to be aware of these concerns of almost half of the workforce that will think this way.
It's interesting because it's something as an employer I had to learn, I had to be taught. And in the old days, people would say, you can't really lump people into that. It's a bit like horoscopes. Not everybody born in that month is that way. But there's no doubt that the bulk of these generations do think very, very similarly, and to be a good employer or to sell to them, to be a good business person, you've really got to understand what drives, what motivates them. It's not always money. And for the younger generations, meaning and contribution is very important, isn't it?
It is. And I think that's one issue when you deal with humans that are not yourself, is that you, through empathy, need to honestly try to understand their main life concerns, their main life goals, and then to take them seriously. And a good business always does this. A good business understands their customer base, and a good employer understands their employees.
Well, Simon, I love these monthly chats we have about demographics. It gives me great insight into where we're heading and where we're at now. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to having our chat again with you real soon.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I hope you learned something in my chat with Simon Kuestenmacher about the big picture, the macro demographic trends that we should be taking advantage of if we want to build our property portfolios or our business. In a moment, I'm going to share my mindset message with you, where I'm going to unpack an interesting concept that I read about a short while ago. But before I do, I'd like to suggest to you that since our property markets are being hit from all directions, this may be a great time for you to review, to update, and maybe even change your property strategy. Now, if you've got the right strategy, I'm not suggesting you should change it because I haven't changed mine, but maybe it's a good time to have a chat with my team at Metropole and allow us to help you formulate a strategic property plan for you and for your family. So if you're really serious about growing your wealth, please go to metropole.com.au, find out a bit about what we do, and block in a time to have a chat with one of my team. It could make a huge difference to your future, because when you have a one-on-one chat, if you choose to go ahead, we can help you plan and manage your property journey to achieve the financial and wealth goals you want. We use a time-tested strategy. So whether you're stuck, whether you're already doing well, or maybe you just want a second opinion, go to metropole.com.au, have a chat with my team. Now, you may end up buying a property, you may end up selling a property, you may use our buyer's agency, our property management, our renovations, our development, our financial planning, our wealth advisory services. But I think it really should all start with planning to become the person you plan to become. metropole.com.au.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In today's mindset message, I'd like to share a concept with you that your life is a rental. It's a zero-sum game. Now, I sort of understand and accept that, but I also have some exception to this thought. But let's just play with this thought for a moment, because it basically suggests that when your time finally comes, you're going to leave everything behind. The wealth you created, the grudges you hold, and even the people you love. They're not things that you take with you. So then why do you spend so much of your time controlling these things or trying to control these things when they're all going to be gone? If you know you're going to leave all your money behind, why are you so absorbed and stressed over gaining more than you need? Maybe instead you should be spending your time being happy instead. The idea of this concept is that life's a zero-sum game. We came here with nothing and you're going to leave with nothing. Your life and everything that you own, including your body, is essentially a rental. It's up to you to fully appreciate it while you're the tenant of that rental. Now, if you think about it that way, there's a freedom in thinking that nothing's yours, because nothing can be lost. Experience things while they last, love them, and then let them go. Let them go on in their own life. Letting go of attachments makes your life richer as you create space for new experiences to come. This also means that when you encounter tough times, times of illness, times of hardship, times of loss, you realise that those moments of darkness are also temporary. They're always temporary. Nothing is here to stay. And when you choose to live every experience that comes your way as a rental, you appreciate these moments. You appreciate them, that they're there for you to embrace, to learn from, but not to keep. And doing that, your focus shifts from living in fear of not having enough to living in abundance as you realise that everything you need is already within you. And while there's a lot of truth to that philosophy, I hope when I go, I'm going to have left a legacy. So I believe there's more to it than just that. So part of the legacy is going to be financial. The asset base I've built, I'm going to leave to my children and grandchildren to make their life easier, and to charity and other organisations, which we're doing now during my life and in the future as well. We're leaving a portion in our wills, Pam and I, to charity on purpose so that we can help others who are less fortunate than us. Similarly, I hope through my podcast, my blogs, my writings, my videos, that I'm going to leave you and others like you a little bit richer, a little bit more financially fluent and able to enjoy your lives as well. Maybe just by leaving you this message. So yes, when you go, when it's all over, you will not take anything with you. But I hope you leave something behind. Well, now you know a little bit more about some Australian demographic trends. If you got some benefit from today's show, why not share it with somebody else who'd get benefit from it? My aim is to make as many people as financially fluent as possible. Why not help me by clicking the share button on your podcast app or just telling somebody about the show? If you want to catch up with me between my regular shows, follow me on social media. Just look for Michael Yardney. I tend to be in most of the social media outlets, as well as, of course, my daily property update blog. But if you'd actually like to work privately with me and spend 5 days with me, why not look at wealthretreat.com.au? Go to wealthretreat.com.au because I'm starting to plan my annual 5-day event where I'm going to help a small group of Australian investors, business people and entrepreneurs plan the next 5 years of their life. We've been doing this, I think, 14, 15 years now. It'll be on the Gold Coast in November, and you're going to be able to spend breakfast, lunch, dinner, actually 5 full days with us. Nothing to sell there. There's just you and a small group of other like-minded, supportive mastermind group people and my faculty helping you get your wealth to the next level. You'll hear more about it in coming months, but register your interest, because if you're interested, I'm going to have a chat with you and then we'll see if it's appropriate. wealthretreat.com.au. Look forward to catching up with you there. Otherwise, I'll be back real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?